Our next speaker, and I'm conscious of time, is Mike Bluestone. I think you're Head of Training and Development for...
Yeah, I'm the Security Risk Consultant there.
Security Risk Consultant for Mighty Security. Although I think your main base is in Milton Keynes, we're delighted that the London office of Mighty is actually based more or less in the patch, Shan Street, I think, isn't it,
right.
Mike? So welcome to speak to us about securing your premises against commercial crime.
Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to focus my presentation on some practical measures to combat crime. You've heard from the police service the threats that are out there. You've seen the statistics. Normally when I'm doing this kind of presentation, I would talk a little bit about the threats, but today I'm going to go straight into hopefully providing you with our take on some security solutions. So this is what I'm going to be talking about, how we meet the threats that the police have outlined to you over previous weeks and previous presentations and today. Adopting a proactive approach, because so often security falls down because the approach is reactive. You know, someone decides to install CCTV when they have a burglary, and sometimes that's just not enough. Raising security awareness, enhancing our own skills and capabilities, and something which I call the security toolbox, which is something I've developed over 18 years in the business. Before I do that, just a few definitions there. I'm not going to go through all these now, but you'll hear me using the term this evening: risk, threat, assets, vulnerability, and adversary. I don't know, Giles, if people are going to get a copy of this presentation, but you're very happy to have that, and you can make reference to these things. The adversary for me is the bad guys. Anyone out there that wants to do you harm, be they a criminal or a terrorist, that's the adversary. Nothing much has changed in terms of keeping security or keeping the adversary at bay through the onion skin principle. Basically, a layered set of rings to protect our assets, the outlying areas, the surrounding environment, the perimeter, the inner zone, the centre of activity, or the holy of holies. And really what we want to do through this process is prevent this kind of thing, the 9/11 type of scenario, and serious crime occurring. I suppose in some respects nothing much has changed since the days of the castle and the moat and the drawbridge and the portcullis. The principles haven't really changed. That's an exercise that we may come back to later if there's time. The security platform that I'm offering, I hope, is going to be solid iron for you. I just want to highlight one point, and the sergeant, it's Steve, isn't it? Steve highlighted it earlier on, which is issues like clear desk policy in businesses, making sure that your data and information are kept safe. This all falls under the category of intellectual property as opposed to physical property. The best example of this is a laptop computer. When a laptop computer goes missing, people say, oh my goodness, that cost me 750 quid. I've now got to replace 1, 10 or 20. Sometimes what they fail to appreciate is the data that's on there. And that can be quite devastating for a business. So the protection of data and locking things away at night, it's a simple thing, it's just so important. Here then are my 8 principles of security. They're developing over the years. They started off some years ago as being 7. I've now increased them to 8. When I get to 10, I shall call them the 10 security commandments. I hope no one will be offended by that, and I think it might be an appropriate term at the time. So let's go straight into those 8 principles, because I know that time is short, and Giles, please give me the nod when we're running out of time. The reason why policy and strategy are right up there at the top is because without that, you won't get a budget. And nothing moves in the business world these days without money. So if you do get hit by a serious burglary, theft or crime, it's no good saying, well, I need 150 K's worth of CCTV, because your bosses will turn around and say to you, sorry, there's no budget for that. Hence the reason why it's so important to have a policy. It also sets the tone for the organisation because everything flows from a security policy and strategy. That's our first principle. The second one is information and intelligence. Now again, in military terms, military intelligence, it's people, crossing borders and doing all this kind of stuff up here. But the sort of intelligence that we use every day that you need to know is when you rent premises, who are your neighbours? If you're in a multi-occupancy building, who's in the building? Who works for you? How have you vetted them? What's in the environment? You might be in an environment where there's some kind of estate or place where there's a lot of crime, and the police will tell you that information. You need to be aware of it so you can take the necessary precautions. People, I don't think manpower is an appropriate term in the 21st century, so I apologise if anyone's offended. I think it ought just to be called people. People are the most important asset in any business. You can have the best all singing or dancing security widgets and gadgets in the world, but when the power fails, it's people that solve the problems. So it's absolutely important that people are well trained. Now, some businesses make the mistake, especially if they have a contract guarding team or an in-house security team, of just making sure that that team is trained. But if you're running a business with 1,000 employees and you've got 4 security guards, you've actually got 1,004 security eyes and ears. Every member of your business can be given some basic security awareness training to understand what might be a threat. For example, someone pulls up outside your business, they jump out, they start taking photographs of your building. Is that an incident or not? Well, it could be, because it could be the precursor to an act of criminality further down the line. And those are the kind of things that people need to be trained up to be aware of. Exactly as Sergeant Steve said earlier on, tailgating is a massive problem in this country because access control isn't robust enough. And it's absolutely vital that access control is good, and it's absolutely vital that people play a big part in that. So what we're going to do now is have a look at some of the technical solutions. Nothing can replace people, but technology can be very useful. So I'm going to rush through quite a few slides. I think I'll have to miss a few out perhaps on some of the fencing, but I'll focus on the key ones. 3 generic types of CCTV, ladies and gentlemen. There's the overt type, which is this piece of artillery, which you can see. It's on the wall and it sends a message, you're being watched. The more discreet type of camera, which you find used a lot in offices now and in shopping malls. It's discreet because it's not necessarily obvious that it's watching you. It's normally contained within an opaque dome. And of course there's the covert camera. And where is that on the screen? Of course we don't know because it's hidden. And covert cameras are used in all sorts of ways for gathering information and evidence. I won't go into that now, but there are 3 generic types. What you see on the screen here is a DVR. It's a digital video recorder. Nowadays, DVRs or digital recorders, digital CCTV systems, have taken the place of analog systems, which previously used a VHS cassette. This is a much more efficient way of doing things because you've got a longer memory. You can play back quickly and identify any image that you need to get to very quickly. So there you see some more examples of CCTV, a nice control room, and the police responding to an activation. At least that was the blue light of the police responding anyway. Access control, have a nice reception desk. I've tried not to use too much techno speak this evening, but obviously everyone here in this room has an access control device with them today because everyone's carrying their front door key. That is an access control device. A PBCL is a push button combination lock. Turnstiles, swipe cards, proximity readers, and biometrics. I'm going to talk about those very briefly now. There you see some standard access control readers with push button and card mechanisms. There you see this nice lady with a key fob, with an access control fob, allowing her to gain access to the premises. And there you have biometrics, some examples of biometrics, a much bandied about term which tends to make people very nervous. It's not tomorrow's technology, it's here and now technology. Here's one using iris recognition, where it literally scans your eye, and no 2 people have the same eyeballs, just as no 2 people have the same fingerprints, even identical twins. And I know that because I run forensic laboratories as well. This is the palm scanner. They're a bit slow, they're a bit cumbersome, and a lot of people are using fingerprint biometrics in mouses like this to log on to computer systems. So if you want to protect the integrity of a computer system, you can have a mouse where it will only activate if you stick your finger in there. And the same thing applies for an access control reader on the door. So nothing really too futuristic about biometrics. And here you have a turnstile, which is a great way of preventing tailgating. They've got those at the Ministry of Defence in Northumberland Avenue. And it's very difficult to try and tailgate there, I can assure you. Here we've got some examples of some of the kit that you'll see for an intruder alarm. We've got a PIR sensor, we've got some mag contacts, and here we see Pulnix or TechX type infrared beams. Now these are very good for protecting large open areas. So if you're running a university campus or a hospital campus or anything which shuts down at night, it's a good idea to install these exterior beams because it gives you good added protection. Now what we're looking at now, by the way, I just wanted to say a little bit more about intruder alarms. There are two types of intruder alarm, or burglar alarm as people call them. There's one which gives a local response, which means that it'll be just bells and whistles, and you're then relying on the good neighbourliness of your neighbours or colleagues to notify the police. Or you have a central station alarm, where you pay a bit extra and the alarm system goes through to a central station. Then you should get a prompt police response. Of course, it depends where you live. Different parts of the country, you get different types of police response. So in rural areas, it may take a bit longer. What we've got here is some examples of some lighting and fencing and signage. Now, first of all, if you've got CCTV, remember to have your signage to comply with the Code of Practice of the Data Protection Act, otherwise you're in trouble. It must state the purpose of the CCTV system, what it's being used for. It must give the name of the operator and a contact number for the operator. Lighting, such a good method for crime prevention. A lot of people don't understand the value of good lighting. The Home Office did a survey about 5 years ago, and they found that actually effective lighting is just as good at preventing crime as CCTV. It's a very interesting report. Here you've got a sophisticated lighting system at this Asda store. Well, you know, a criminal's got to be a bit out of their mind, literally, to try and go through the front door of that when it's lit up in such a way. And these type of sensor lights, which you can buy to put on your home or your offices, are so cheap. You can buy them in shops for $9.99, $19.99, and very easy to fit. What you see here is a more sophisticated fencing system. It looks like it's protecting an airfield or some kind of major industrial centre. You've got a double line of fencing, and you've also got here electric fencing. I don't know if you can see through there the electric fencing, which if you hit that, it will actually give you a bit of a shock, and it will also notify security that there are suspects on the premises. This is an interesting product. It's called Smoke Cloak. Just watch the screen for a moment. Basically what it is, it's a box of smoke, and it's linked to an alarm system. So if you've got a room like this filled with expensive computers and someone breaks in and tries to steal that stuff, the room will fill with smoke. They won't be able to see what they're doing. The trouble is with our legal system today, if they fall over and break their neck, you're going to be liable for failing in your duty of care to the criminal. Shall I move on? Now I'm going to skip the fencing stuff. But actually, I'm not going to skip it. I'm just going to flash through some different types of fencing and talk very quickly about palisade fencing. Because the thing about palisade fencing is that because you can see the bolts there, sometimes the criminals remove the bolts with actual sort of large spanners. But also, what you can do with that fencing is you can take a car jack and put it in between and jack it open. So I'm not going to go through my detailed critique of these, but if you want to look at it when you get the presentation, feel free to do so. There's some chain link fencing. The problem with that is that it's cheap, but it's easily climbed and it's high maintenance. Now this is good fencing. This is Exponet, because this is actually, it's like a sheet of iron, and the holes are then cut out of the iron, of the metal, which means that you can't really tamper it very well. It's more expensive, but it's very good stuff. So if anyone here has got a sort of outer, a large estate that needs perimeter protection, that's good fencing, as is the welded mesh, except that it can be used. One of the disadvantages of that is that you can use it to sort of, dump rubbish and stuff. It's a bit of an eyesore from that point of view. Then you've got the electric fences, normally used in conjunction with another fence. What you don't want to do is start electrocuting people straight away. That's not a good idea. You won't make many friends that way. So you have your outer fence, you have your warning signs, you have your electric fence within that boundary. You'll find those on a lot of utility sites. British Gas have them, a lot of utility organisations have them. How am I doing for time, Giles? Okay. So it's a good deterrent, not easily climbed. There is a false alarm rate, but it's quite expensive and it doesn't look pretty. And you've got to have all these warnings up there, yeah? So just take note of this. And before anyone asks me, you cannot electrify barbed wire or barbed tape coil, which you see on top of walls. That's strictly against the law. But here are some of the fence toppings, as we call them. It almost sounds like a recipe for making a cake, doesn't it? A topping. You have the barbed wire or the rolled, the tape coil or these spikes. But broken glass, ladies and gentlemen, is illegal. You mustn't do that. You'll get into terrible trouble if you put broken glass on the top of walls. Gates and barriers. Yes. Sorry, does someone have a question? No?
Razor wire.
Razor wire, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. You've got some, yeah? Gates and barriers, obviously an ideal way of keeping people out, because an ordinary car park lift barrier isn't a real barrier at all. It's just saying, this is my territory, stay out. The other good thing about using these type of gates is that you can create airlock environments, which means that a vehicle will drive in there, that gate opens, they then drive in, there's another one, that gate shuts behind them, they're stuck. No one can tailgate. And you can do that with pedestrian gates as well. So let's have another look at gates. You can all see these beautiful slides in large font, so it's not like an eye test at the opticians. So I'm not going to read them all. Building protection. What we've got here is anti-bandit glazing, different types of glazing for buildings with all the British standards for you to have a look at. So when you're suffering from insomnia, you can Google in the middle of the night onto the British Standards Institute website and look up all of these British standards. But here's some of the different types of glazing you can have. Annealed, toughened, polycarbonate, laminated, double glazing, anti-shatter film for counter-terrorist protection. And obviously windows, locks and grills and blinds. Because the good thing about having blinds in offices is it stops people looking in, seeing all your expensive computer equipment. Some tips there on door frames, which you'll be able to look at later on. Including walls, how to construct the walls so that they have sort of metal encasements to prevent people smashing through your walls with sledgehammers or even with vehicles. Different types of locks. A Yale lock isn't much good. You need to go for a good mortise lock or a push-button combination lock. Electric locks, and you have to have manual overrides for electrical failure, of course, and padlocks, although I'm not a great fan of those because they can be chopped off with bolt cutters. Keys. It's amazing, actually. You go into a hotel, lean across the desk, and all the keys are there in a cabinet. The only trouble is the cabinet's never locked, is it? So it's very important to keep keys safe. And you can get all sorts of key cabinets these days, push-button ones, digital ones, electronic ones, or even ones with a simple key. So you lock your keys in the cabinet, take the key, put it in your pocket. The keys for your premises are therefore safe. Now, automatic number plate recognition systems are an extension of CCTV. It's just a slightly more sophisticated way of ensuring protection of car parks with vehicles. What the camera is doing on an ANPR system is taking a photo image of your number plate. So if you input onto the database all the car registration numbers of your employees and your regular contractors, then anyone approaching your barrier who's bona fide, the camera system is saying, I know you, I recognize that number plate, Mike 123, you're in. But if someone comes to that barrier and their number plate is not recognized, it's not on the system, they will have to receive a human challenge by someone talking to them through a door entry com or some kind of other intercom system. See, that kind of barrier is pretty useless. That's just saying, you know, these are my premises, stay out. Once you drive through that, the bolts shear off and the vehicle will go through. What you need is the serious stuff. These are increasingly used on a whole range of sites. I've got clients in the banking sector that have these blockers which sink into the ground. That's a 50-ton bus carrying tons of simulated explosives. Has hit that blocker at 50 miles an hour. It's stopped dead in its tracks. When you're next visiting Buckingham Palace, look behind the old iron gates because now they've got them there too. They did install them rather late, in my opinion, because they used to work round the corner to the palace, but at least they've got them. This is a cheapo version where the barrier doesn't sink into the ground but lies flat on the surface, so you drive over it. So literally, when it's in the up position, it's like that. That's what you would see from a side profile. And this is the bollard version, which are very good for protecting little side streets. Do I have time just to tell a funny anecdotal story? Someone incorrectly used this for access control at a main gate to a conference centre. and the chief executive drove up and parked when this was in the down position. You know what I'm going to say? The security guard hit the wrong button. His nice BMW was lifted into the air. Final couple of minutes now. Control and supervision is another key principle. You have to know who's got ownership of security, because when things go wrong, you know, you don't see anyone. But when things go right, you might see everyone saying, well, I'm in charge of security. So it is important to know exactly who's in charge of security in the organisation. Procedures. We forget procedures. Please keep them simple. Write them down. It's unfair, for example, to discipline staff for taking their laptop computers home or for propping open the doors with a fire extinguisher if you haven't documented the disciplinaries of the do's and don'ts of how to look after security. Because if you then go to an ET with them, you can be in trouble. So make sure you have security procedures, make sure they're simple. Make sure you test your security systems, even if it means having a very inconvenient annual evacuation for a bomb threat or something like that. And finally, make sure that you audit your security system. Make sure that you either audit it internally or sometimes use external people to do it. And as Sergeant Steve suggested, get some penetration tests done. Get people in to test your security. It doesn't have to be too sophisticated or too expensive. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll make way for the next speaker because we're short on time, aren't we?